Say it again, Jason. This time, recording level quality.
Okay.
I'm going to make a marker. One second.
Awesome.
Jason, recording, intro. Done. Okay, go.
All right. What is the meaning of technology in our lives? What place does technology have in the universe? What place does it have in the human condition? And what place should it play in my own personal life? Welcome to the Seventh Kingdom. With your hosts, Jason Lang and
Stan James.
Yeah.
This is going to be fun.
I'm going to have to get over the uncomfortableness of hearing my own voice.
So it's the Seventh Kingdom. It's kind of a weird title. Some of my friends immediately think it sounds religious.
Yes, there is that context for sure.
And seventhkingdom.com is some kind of religious blog.
But there's also I think I told you when I Googled it, the second or third one is like a .net or something, and it's a LARPing site.
Yes, which is perfect. We are at the intersection of religion and LARPing.
Exactly. And for those that don't know what LARPing is, it's live action role playing. So it's basically like Civil War reenactments, but instead of being based on these historical things, it's based on, Dungeons or Dragons or the Battle for Middle-earth from Lord of the Rings, stuff like that.
It's grown men dressing up as elves and dwarves and running around in the forest with swords.
That's correct. But so those two things alone make me really attracted to this title, because there is already so much going on in the space. I think after you and I emailed each other and I was like, hey, you want to do this? And you were like, yes. I actually don't remember how I specifically found it.
Well, we both read Kevin Kelly's blog, The Technium.
Yeah, I was on Kevin Kelly's blog, and he must have referred back to it in a newer blog post, because it's a couple of years old. I believe
2008 or so.
Yeah, and it's a blog post from Kevin Kelly talking about this idea of the Seventh Kingdom. Is technology going to be the seventh kingdom of life?
In his mind, I think he's pretty set that it is. He's one of the great technology optimists, that things are going as they should be with technology and getting better.
But yeah, I believe we were having this discussion, and I literally was just reading another article, and I saw that one, and I started reading it, and I was like, wow, that's kind of what I want to talk to Stan about.
And the intro line, the thing that we opened with, what is the meaning of technology in our lives?
What is the meaning of technology in our lives? What place does technology have? I
think it was the first
universe?
Lines of that blog post, and that pretty much encapsulates what we want to talk about here.
And I believe we even have a clip.
Yeah, so here is Kevin Kelly speaking at, to fill in later what conference this is, where he's explaining what he means by Seventh Kingdom.
I'm actually suggesting that just as there are 6 kingdoms of life on Earth, the 3 bacteria and plants, animals, and fungi, that we can actually think of the technium as an extension of evolutionary process, and I would call it the 7th kingdom of life. So this 7th kingdom of life is what we are surrounding ourselves with.
I asked my German friends of how they thought of the title. My friend Fabian immediately thought that it was reference to the Game of Thrones series.
Which I do love. We are a house vying for the throne. One of the things that I liked about the idea, as opposed to, we had a brainstorm list of some other things, is just the actual grammar of it in terms of the Seventh Kingdom. It's like a place. It immediately in my mind conjured the idea that it's somewhere you can go or not go. You can enter into or you can leave, which,
yes,
in some ways embodies that idea of there is this whole other layer of reality emerging around us right now. This technical world that right now we're basically limited to accessing through these screens, these little portals That's one of the, I think, the key things that fascinates me right now is we're talking about this emergence of how it used to be, something, this place us geeks would explore, technology, but now it's kind of becoming everywhere, and it's just spreading more and more and more around us, where there's literally down to the basic fact that there's cell waves flying by my head right now that probably have somebody's email in it, someone else's FaceTime. Who knows?
Flying through the air right here.
Yeah.
Like you can't quite touch it, but I know it's out there. There's email and news and movies flying by me.
It's kind of mind-boggling, It's this whole invisible world, but it's becoming more visible. I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
It's emerging. Yeah. The Seventh Kingdom. So yeah, that's where that title came from, and I hope people like it.
We're sorry. Your call cannot be completed as dialed from the phone you are using. Please read the instruction card or call your operator to help you.
Who are you, Jason Lang? What do you do? What's the story?
Yeah.
Where do you live?
I'm currently living in Los Angeles in North Hollywood. Having moved out here about 2.5 years ago from Boulder. And I am a writer and director of mainstream entertainment and film. At least that's what I'm working on.
When I visited you in LA, you took me onto a movie set on my first night.
Yeah, that's right.
Very exciting. I'm still waiting for the IMDb credit for my essential role of holding a boom mic over my head for a few minutes.
Yeah, I like how you kindly put it as you took me onto a set as opposed to you put me to work.
It was a gift.
But yeah, so it's an interesting time for me to have even moved out here to Hollywood in terms of wanting to break into the film industry. Just because, like many other things, it's changing right now, and a large reason it's changing is the impact of technology and how technology has affected the economy, which affects how media is made. So, these aren't just theoretical ideas we're discussing. These are things that are actually, affecting the world and my world day to day around me, which is really interesting. But so, yeah, I think I'm working towards being a writer-director, I think partially because of how much media and technology impacted me early on. Particularly like gaming and then film. A lot of my richest experiences when I was younger centered around going to the movies with family and the awe and the emotion and that experience. And
what's one of the movies that affected you the most as a kid? Or maybe is there one that inspired you to get into film?
Yeah, it's not really a straight trajectory because even film, my portal was technology. Because I was definitely, I was a teenager right as the computer was coming online in filmmaking. So, this was like the early 90s and the video toaster and silicone graphics, all that stuff.
Sorry, what's a video toaster?
Video toaster was made by a company called New Tech, and it was like the first, I guess, not cheap, but accessible nonlinear editing system for computers, which meant when you filmed something, you could put it on your computer and you could edit it like a Microsoft Word document. You could cut and paste things, move it around, as opposed to, the traditional reel-to-reel way where it's like every frame of film has to go forward or backward through that reel. And then you physically have to cut it, move it, tape it back together.
Wow.
And with that, the second you get something on computer, you can start adding computer effects, which was the big thing. And that's, I think, what initially hooked me was,
It's all for the effects.
Yeah, in the early 90s, that was, I definitely remember Terminator 2 and what an impact that had on me, seeing that with my dad. It was, it was the first time I think I saw computer graphics that were basically seamless, where it really was like, you're not thinking about them so much when you see them. They actually served the story.
Yeah, you stayed in that world and just lived it.
So that got me, reading all the computer graphics magazines. When I was in junior high, my dad bought us we Our previous computer was an Intel 286, which was,
Wow.
had a lot of power. And we went from that to I think 5 years later, he plunked down a huge chunk of money and bought the first Pentium, which was the equivalent of a 586. And a quantum leap in computing power. But that came with, a really nice video card and a triple X CD-ROM player. So I got into multimedia games, which, again, was that kind of interesting crossover that started in the early 90s where, movies were going to become games and games were going to become movies.
Is this like Myst? Would that be the early example
Myst was
of that?
definitely Myst, The Seventh Guest, Phantasmagoria, I think it was called. But these games that actually videotaped people and had real human actors, then they would insert them into virtual environments. So that was going on the same time as I was going and seeing movies like Terminator and Twister and Jurassic Park. So I just got obsessed and, started. I think I went to Barnes & Nobles and bought a couple 3D graphics books and started kind of teaching myself. And I never really had the artistic prowess to do much with it, but I had the technical prowess, so I learned quite a bit.
Yeah.
About that process and just got obsessed with movie special effects, really. But it was from special effects, I think I just kind of pivoted more towards, it's not the special effects that are impacting me in these movies. It's the narrative, it's the emotional experience I'm having. The special effects just facilitate that. So at some point in high school, I kind of had that realization and made that pivot.
There's a real development of cognitive development to realize, oh wait, it's not just the explosions. There's other things in the film that are affecting me.
That kind of led me into film school, and then kind of had a segue in my 20s where I really moved out to Boulder basically to focus on personal growth and kind of spiritual development in terms of having come from a pretty traditional middle class family. There were definitely moments in my life where I had an awareness that things weren't exactly how I wanted them to be. It wasn't depression necessarily. It was just that I've had these experiences in my life where I feel like there's other ways of being in the world, and man, I don't know how to do that yet.
Yeah.
Or, sometimes it's as simple as hanging out with someone, and it's like, man, how do you seem like you just have your stuff together, and then wanting more of that. So that kind of led me to Colorado and getting into the fitness world and into the meditation world and into therapy of all things and stuff like that, all of which actually taught me a lot, though, which is, now coming to LA is very interesting because, right, how do you write a story that means something, Well, part of writing a story that means something is understanding how I've been affected by media. What was it that made me cry in that scene or made me just, shake my arms up in the air in glee at the end? That's kind of led me here.
You bring up a good point that media is this kind of media is intrinsically related to technology. And I think we're going to talk a lot about media in this podcast too, simply because I guess media is where technology impacts our life at least the most obviously. You're crying in a film. It's the film technology which is making you cry, or you listen to a song which brings back these powerful memories, and the song is being played by your iPod, and you get these connections of media is intrinsically tied up with technology.
That's kind of my rap, I suppose. Which it has me wondering the same thing about you, Stan. Who are you, Stan James, and what exactly got you here?
I am now living in San Francisco as of just a few months ago. I was living in Berlin the last few years, attempting to write a book, much like our blog posts, I suppose. It didn't quite happen that way, but got me really deep into these questions of technology and the brain and psychology and where is it going and how is it affecting people's lives.
When did you become a computer guy? Or
Yeah, I remember we had a neighborhood dinner, a progressive dinner it's called, where we went around to all the family houses as a kid. And I'm really going to date myself here, but one of the houses had Pong. This had to be about maybe 1980 or so. And I was vaguely intrigued that you could control the television, but it wasn't until a few years later that my dad got a teaching job, and in this school district, they had just gotten a lot of money to put computers in all the schools.
oh wow,
This was actually overseas on a base in Okinawa. And I think it was one of those classic things where they had bought all these computers, but there really was no one who knew how to use them. And I had to wait after school for my dad to finish grading papers and things before he would drive me home. So I had time to kill, and I could sit there and play on this computer. It was an Atari 800. Wasn't a very successful computer model. But like you, I originally just started using it to play and to make games.
Yeah.
And I remember a very visceral sense of, I guess, power that I could create something and then interact with it. It's like I was building my own toys.
yeah,
And there was just something about I could create a world and then interact with that world. One of my earliest games was just the computer could make little crude circles, and all this programming language, all you could do was type things and then ask questions, and based on the person's answer, type something different. And using little circles, I made it like a moon map of different craters, and you could just type like go north, go west, and you would move around this little moon map.
oh cool,
And this was awesome to me. I don't know why I love that so much. And kind of like you, with hindsight, I'm impressed how much money my parents plonked down to later that year buy us an Apple II system. Although it actually wasn't a real Apple II system, it was a clone out of Hong Kong, which I think we think they paid about $1,000, and list price for those things should have been like close to $3,000 for.
Yeah.
We got the printer, we got the disk drives, we got the whole sweet deal. And maybe as an aside, this is something else we should talk about sometime, of the role of piracy and
Yes.
illegalness. That on the one hand, it wasn't right what my parents did. Like I'm like, oh, Apple did not get a dime from my parents. On the other hand, it put me on this life trajectory,
Yes.
which it changed my whole life. And my parents, I mean, they didn't have a lot of money. So if they had gone the legitimate route, I would have been years behind the technology curve.
Yeah. Wow. That's so cool. I didn't know you were making games that early. I never knew that.
I was always a game maker. I made a lot of board games and stuff too as a kid. There was something about this creating worlds that I could create a set of rules, and I was amazed how other people would accept them so unquestioningly. You just tell them, well, no, after you play the square card, you can only play the diamond card.
Yeah.
Okay. And you would shape the world based on these little simple rules. And the computer was just, I guess, a more efficient and more media-rich way than making playing cards or cutting out construction paper. You could work much faster, and it was a really powerful experience too to see like the neighbor kid come over and play the simple guess what number I'm thinking of game, and how much fun it would be to then change it so it would say a cuss word when you got it wrong. I hope mom doesn't look, right?
Yeah. Wow.
And then I guess more personally, I have been amazed. Like as a kid, there was a deep, almost sense of shame. You know, that it was like you were a nerd, right? This was not something to be proud of. Technology was, I don't know, a bad thing to be interested in. And even in college, I tried to hide it. And it was like my dark little secret. And you try to, this is all pre-Facebook, but
Sure.
you try to project this, I'm an athlete and I do other things, or I'm a poet and I read books.
Yeah.
But then in thinking that technology was my world, but then slowly and steadily it crept into everyone else's world. And suddenly friends of mine were downloading illegal MP3s in the like Napster days. And then you hear about, you know, this girl from high school is on the internet, and like, what? How did that happen? And then, you know, accelerating all the way up to the web was like my geek hangout thing, and then suddenly everyone is on Facebook, and I remember being kind of not ashamed, but wondering if I should pull out my little pocket computer on a flight. This is probably like in the 80s. Of what would people think if I was using a computer on an airplane, how geeky it would make me look. And, you know, now, of course, it's complete. I probably feel more shame pulling out a book now. Who's this guy who's behind the times? Doesn't he know there's Kindles?
Wow.
And how the mainstreaming of technology, and it's not just my life, but it's affecting other people's lives. And you see all the record stores close. That was a big moment in my life of, oh, this little digital world that I've been playing in actually has real consequences out in the physical world.
Yes. Yeah.
So, well, to answer your question, Jason, about my life, I should get my chronology in here. I studied philosophy and computer science in college, and then immediately after that, I got the dream job of designing games right out of college. This was 1996, so very first generation of online web games, and my games were kind of successful for that era, although we never figured out how to make much money from them, which is a whole other problem. But I had the early experience of watching people get addicted to my games, of also watching a lot of joy come out of it, of watching people make friends out of games that I made. And this always had me thinking of like, what's going on here? This is really interesting. And then later, when the dot-com bubble burst, I went back to grad school and studied cognitive science, which got me thinking about how the brain works and what things were evolved for this purpose, and yet how is it working now? And just the simple act of watching television, and you know, we didn't evolve around televisions, so why is it so damn enjoyable? People spend hours a day doing this. And after grad school, I based on my master's thesis, I started this company, Legit Networks, which is based in Boulder, which is how I met you, Jason.
Yes, I very vividly remember you coming in to the nonprofit I was working at the time and giving a presentation on Outfoxed, and how I had that experience that I think is sometimes rare in life, but such a joy when you hear somebody else verbally expressing thoughts you've had in your mind but didn't necessarily have the language for yet or the structure around. So I just remember going like, yes, yeah, yes, throughout your whole presentation, just like, totally, that so makes sense.
And yeah, well, as it turns out, most of the big ideas were ahead of their time, and maybe we'll talk about that too. And now Google and Facebook are just catching up with the deep thoughts that I had back then. But that's a talk for another day. But being in the startup world, I was amazed at how many psychological and scientific things would play out of, oh, how does advertising actually work on the brain? and oh, people get addicted to these games. I'm like, all right, that's like, the serotonin dopamine release cycle happening here, and this is analogous to what happens when you train animals over here. And basically, that they, in a sense, all these startups and online companies, they're doing science but without knowing they're doing science.
Yeah.
and that really captured my attention, and that's the stuff I want to talk about on our podcast too.
Awesome.
So Jason, why did you? What gave you the idea? Like, you sent me this email proposing to do a podcast. What prompted you to send that email? Why that day in particular?
I feel like we had been emailing back and forth about some other things.
Yeah, right. You had asked me about if I knew some articles about
That's right.
memory, the Mimex for your movie short.
That's right. I've been writing one short film about the Memorex, which is kind of this idea of shared memory. And then I think I was also hitting you up because I started and then did not finish a blog post about intertextual references and kind of world building and universe building and crossovers. This was like right after the Avengers and a couple other things where that movie just crushed it in the box office. And I was just reading up on crossovers and how popular they are and how popular they've always been, like going back, like even, I started doing some rudimentary research and like even going back to the Odyssey and the Iliad and like these original theatrical tales where characters would come back into other stories.
The first crossovers and the first sequels.
Yeah, and I think what I was really and it was right around the time Prometheus came out as well, which is kind of a crossover / prequel in an interesting way. But what was really interesting to me was like, what is that? What got me interested in like, who would know the answer to this question I'm having right now? Because I was like, is there a term for that type of pleasure that comes from seeing two separate universes kind of combine, even in just a fictional story?
Right.
Like I was, when Prometheus came up, there was just this teeny reference to the television show Firefly, which came out like, I don't know, in the 90s. And it was one of Joss Whedon's first shows, who went on to do The Avenger. And anyway, in like the first episode, there's one cutaway shot to a heads-up display of like the guy flying the ship, and it's like his overlay of the technology. And it has the Weyland-Yutani logo from the Alien franchise.
Oh, wow.
As supposedly being the company that made the technology that's running that ship. So just with that one little graphic, there's like this implicit like, oh, maybe this is in that same universe. And it's like a geek orgasm moment of like, oh my God. And I just suddenly was thinking about like, what is it about crossovers? Why do we love it so much when stories continue or kind of cross-pollinate each other? And I could not find anything on the internet. So I was like, I'm going to ask Stan. I'm going to ask my buddy Stan James, because he's the kind of guy that might know this.
And then I think I came back with an answer that was not quite what you were expecting.
Yeah.
I came back with this like deep, like, neuroscientific paper about perceptual pleasure in the brain and opioid receptors in the primary visual cortex, and how it integrates when it integrates with memories, how it's especially pleasurable, which is about the most low-level explanation of crossover. But yet, in some way, they mix somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was from there that, this would happen, I think, between you and I. Every couple months, we'd send an email. You'd send me some blog posts you were working on. I would send you some stuff about things I was hoping to write that I'd never get around to.
Yeah, I think we both have a lot of unwritten blog posts.
Yeah, and that's part of what also drove me is, I've been trying to make a conscious push this year to kind of get more active in terms of having a voice in the world and getting some of my thoughts out there. And blogging I like, but it feels like work, and it's been a struggle.
Yeah. Well, and blogging is it's necessarily solitary in a way. That you're sitting there, you're writing. No one's begging you to write a blog post. Very rarely, in my experience.
Completely.
And no one's waiting on you, I guess. But with a podcast, I mean, one, it's inherently social. I love this. Like now, I'm talking with Jason. We're riffing. It's something I enjoy so much, and it takes both of us. Like I can't make the Jason and Stan podcast by myself, and neither can you. And because it requires both of us, it's inherently social, and there's an inherent driver. It's like having a workout buddy.
Exactly. There's some accountability. And that's, I think, what started to seal the deal for me was like, okay, well, what are some ways I can start thinking about these ideas and exploring it with someone that's kind of fun? And boom, you came to the top of my list because, back in the days when we were both living in Boulder, we already did this. We just weren't recording it.
Yeah. And you would sometimes comment like, if someone could overhear us, this is the most interesting conversation in the room. And the story the defining moment of that for me was when I flew to visit you in Los Angeles. And at that moment, I just had my heart broken and was totally crushed. I think I had just left the girl like hours earlier. And we went to have a big breakfast. And I drank far too much coffee because she kept refilling my cup and I wasn't paying attention. But I just remember the sheer pleasure, really, of discussing all these far-out ideas with you. A great, smart conversation about really interesting and not just geeky, but also, very human and down-to-earth. What does this mean for how we live? How does it make our life better? And it was, especially coming out of that sort of gloom of the rejection, it was a reminder of, I really enjoy this. This is a good thing in life. Having these conversations with Jason is a good thing. I should do more of this.
That reminds me of, I talk tech all the time with friends, and I read the blogs all the time about what the new iPhone's going to look like, what are the new features and this and that, and that's covered. There's so much information out there already for that. But what, while I was in Boulder, I was heavily involved in kind of the personal development and transformational communities, which Boulder, where we were living together, is an interesting town because it is actually this unique kind of valley in both that there's now a very rich and vibrant startup culture there.
Yeah.
So there are, like your tech company and others are there innovating, creating new products. But then there's also this deep tradition of spiritual communities and startups there in a sense, whether it's Naropa or the Shambhala Center or the Integral folks, just lots of Buddhist practitioners, lots of people that are studying behavior and the human condition and how do we get through life on a day-to-day basis and kind of feel better about it all.
Yeah. Well, how does it affect our lives? It's not, it's one thing that the iPhone has a new app, but it's a totally different question of, how does that affect my life? Does it make my life better? How does it change my relationships? What should I do with this new piece of technology?
Yeah, and it's what I feel like I haven't seen as much as people discussing that. I think partially because it is happening so fast. Yes. I mean, even, I'm a pretty tech savvy guy, and even for me to think back to, 10 years ago and how different things are, it's it's hard to see patterns when they're happening faster than I think you can process the data. It's just oh, there's a phone. Oh, now everybody has that phone, and now everybody has GPS, and da-da-da-da, and it's just boom, 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 boom. Right.
And so what we have a lot of talk about the geeky features, like the new iPhone and the latest offering from Google, and maybe even the competitive analysis. And then on the other side, I think you only get kind of the shrill, is this bad? Is it good? Technology is awful, or we need to cut it out, or the utopian, it's going to save us. And there isn't much subtlety in between there.
Yes, it's that complexity is missing, that just that simple, I think, realization that like any other powerful, I guess in a way, state altering thing, whether it's,
Yeah.
A drug or a relationship or technology, it's not that it's good or bad, it's your relationship to it, right? It's how are you using it? It's, yes, technology, I think some people can become addicted to it and it can have some dire consequences in their lives, but it can also do some really brilliant, amazing things. So it's not either or,
Yeah.
it's a spectrum.
And you have to know, you have to look at the whole range of things. If you just pick out, oh look, this kid is addicted to video games, that's not enough to judge the whole thing. There's so many things at play here, which is part of why we find it so fascinating.
Yes.
From the primary visual cortex down in the brain to wider social patterns of how does it change dating, to business models that are changing and affecting the recording industry. There's so many things at play here. You can't just pick out one element and judge the whole thing.
And it's I think the other tricky thing about how fast everything's moving is it really is symbiotic in terms of, yes, we're driving the technology and changing it and evolving it, but I think it's a two-way road where stuff is happening back to us. And I don't think that's really in the public consciousness yet in terms of like, just think about, I was making some notes about some of our future episodes, but just learning, the idea of what is learning these days. When I was growing up, they had the thing that was like, a lot of learning was memorization. It was how well can you memorize the state capitals? Can you memorize the multiplication tables? Can you memorize how to spell words? And that was how they tested intelligence. But who needs to know that now? When you have a phone with you and you can outsource that to Google, why? What's the benefit? I mean, and what's the trade-off there in terms of, is it wrong to outsource all that intelligence? Or I don't know. But that's the kind of stuff we want to be discussing that is happening right now.
Right. And bring in the context of, I love reading about how Socrates hated writing for exactly that reason, that if people are putting all their knowledge in books, then they won't have it in their heads. And this is this awful development. And so trying to look at the broader context of what's new. There's a lot of stuff which is new, but there's also some patterns we can learn from the past. What happened when the printing press came in? What are other technologies that have changed our lives, and how did we react, and how did we recover?
And what were the initial arguments against them and for them? And oftentimes, which I think align very similarly to some of the arguments today for and against certain technologies.
I love that we have a spectrum of, there's like for the whole society, is it good or bad for society? But then also down on the individual level of, what about my life? Texting has revolutionized web communication, but how should I think about it?
Yeah, that's the brilliant thing about technology, I think. It affects the three big primary things in the universe. It affects just the kind of the world out there. It affects the we, the way you and I interact in our relationships, and it affects I. It affects, how is my brain processing this information? How much attention can I give to anything in the moment? How do I feel about myself right now? It's amazing. The other thing I just want to quickly get to is the context of the history of technology and how it's changing and how it's changing us, and how that really kind of brings online a evolutionary side of things. Like, is technology actually going somewhere? That's one question I think you and I share an interest in, and that this podcast is really about. And if so, where is it going? And how does that trajectory relate to the trajectory we already came from?
Right. Where do we fit in the whole scheme of things?
Yes. Is this thing that we think we created, this technology, we created technology, we're making computers. Did we even create that? Or is that just an outbranch of this thing that theoretically started with the Big Bang?
Yeah. And then how does that play into, what does it all mean? And we're not a religious podcast, I think, but I think it's great that we should be okay to go there. Things that we want to talk about on this podcast. We started brainstorming about things we could talk about. This document just filled up with things.
Are things getting better? What do we mean by better? Were things better in the past?
Attention. Everyone's talking about attention. At our coffee in LA, Jason, I totally remember you saying that meditation practices our attention muscle and how important that is now that everything is screaming for our attention.
Advertising. Is it evil that companies are now optimizing their advertising to get you to buy more and more and more?
Games. Are they good or are they bad? Gamification of banking and fitness.
Relationships. Facebook, flirting, dating, OkCupid.
Art. What does it mean to be like a painter? Is that just ancient now? Can you be an online artist? Is that even art that's going on?
Decision fatigue. Is choice good or bad?
Music. Music is probably one of the ways where technology first came into people's lives with iPods and iPhones, and it's also a place where the business models totally fell apart.
The evolution of the internet. What did it start as? Where is it going?
Addiction. People are addicted to Facebook, addicted to checking email. People are addicted to their phones. What is addiction on the science level? What does it mean to be addicted to technology? Is there good addiction, bad addiction?
Pornography. The supernormal addiction. Is it turning guys into asocial wimps?
Learning. Anyone in the world can learn about math and science, and it's just all you need is an internet connection.
Drugs. A potent form of technology. How is technology a drug?
Technology and emotion. Crying in a movie, or you have a crush on an actor in a TV show. How does that even work?
Screens. How they work, the history of, emotional experiences, big screens, little screens, they're everywhere these days. How are they impacting us? All right, well, I think that'll about do it for this first inaugural episode of The Seventh Kingdom. Hey, Stan, if people want to learn more about you or read some of the stuff you've written in the past, where can they go?
I keep a blog at wanderingstan.com. And Jason, do you have any online presence? How would people find out more about you?
You can see some of my sparse writings and some of the media projects I've worked on at jasonlang.me. Thanks for joining me, Stan. And thanks to everybody listening at home.
Just as I predicted, it's been great talking with you, Jason. And I'm happy that now some people could listen with us.
And yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of great conversations in the future. Until next time.